Hello, and welcome everyone to the Geopolitics and Geoeconomics of COVID-19, Discerning the South Asia-China Nexus. My name is Farwa Aamer, and I head the South Asia program at the EastWest Institute, which is a global network of influential stakeholders engaged in building trust and preventing conflict around the globe. The coronavirus is proven to be a defining moment in modern history, straining economies worldwide and shifting global power dynamics in many ways. But how would this redefine South Asia and its engagement with neighboring China, which has built a significant footprint in the region over the last few decades? To further shed light on this, we have with us Dr. Parag Khanna, who is a leading global strategy advisor, world traveler, and best-selling author. He is the founder and managing partner of Future Map, a data and scenario-based strategic advisory firm. He is also a global young leader for the World Economic Forum, and he was featured as one of the 75 most influential people of the 21st century by Esquire, and he's also on Wired Magazine's Smart List. Undoubtedly, we at EWI are huge fans of Dr. Khanna's all-encompassing knowledge in Asia and his incredible work. So truly delightful to have you on our platform once again. Also joining us today is our very own Dr. William Parker, CEO and President of the EastWest Institute, an award-winning author himself. Dr. Parker has served as the Chief of Staff for the U.S. Naval Surface Forces. In addition to multiple combat tours, he held the post of Senior Advisor for the U.S. embassies in Syria, in Iraq, and in Pakistan. His PhD work, interestingly, has been on planning for a pandemic, combining the clinical area of epidemiology along with strategic skills that are required to manage such major events. He has been currently working with multiple governments, including the United States, on how to deal with the coronavirus and its aftermath. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for your time. This is going to be an exciting discussion. But before we begin, we have some housekeeping notes for our terrific audience. Each speaker would speak for about 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel, and I'll be able to bring your question up at the end during the Q&A segment. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Khanna. Dr. Khanna, you've been assessing and discussing the trends and implications of the coronavirus and how it serves to be a global reset point. So it'll be interesting to hear from you as what do you think is the current state of geopolitics and diplomacy, and what does this mean for the South Asia-China equation going forward, particularly against the backdrop of the ongoing challenges? So over to you, Dr. Khanna.
Great, thank you so much, Farwa. Thank you, Bill. I'm honored to have been invited to join this discussion, and it's obviously a very, very timely subject, not least, obviously, for the current events happening between India and China. So I know we'll spend some time on that. But as you suggested, why don't we step back first and look at the broader geopolitical shifts that we can discern in light of the coronavirus. I'm of the view that the COVID-19 virus has actually accelerated a number of fundamental global trends that were already quite visibly underway. The first and most obvious one is the shift towards regional economic and diplomatic structures over global ones. So regionalism over globalism, to put it in shorthand. We saw that as a result, not least of the trade war, for example. Even before the coronavirus broke out, the US was trading more each with Mexico and Canada than with China, for example. Intra-European trade is the vast majority of its trade. Intra-Asian trade is the vast majority of the Asian trade. So this regionalism shift, I think, is obviously going to be accelerated. We don't even know when certain borders are going to open. We don't know when inter-regional flights are going to resume on a regular basis, and so on and so forth. Now we also have all the protectionist, regulatory, nationalist investment restriction and other kinds of economic measures that are going to favor localization, regionalization above all else. So I think the trend towards this regionalism is most certainly going to accelerate. Let me now turn it to Asia, where no doubt, even though Asia is the only region of the world that will likely record any economic growth this year, obviously it's certainly been hit by the pandemic. But the one thing I want to focus on, again, a secular trend, if you will, that was underway before the pandemic, was the growing scrutiny of China. Again, the US-China trade war, as mentioned earlier, is one dimension of it, but the supply chain shifts out of China and the efforts of many foreign investors to not concentrate all their eggs in one basket, in the China basket. Those go back actually 10 years. Japan began to massively divert foreign investment out of China into Southeast Asia 10 years ago. So it has nothing to do with the election of Trump, nothing to do with the US-China trade war, nothing to do with the coronavirus, right? So we need to make sure that when we look back at this period, that we don't attribute everything to the coronavirus that has nothing to do with the coronavirus. Obviously, again, it's an accelerant, not so much the beginning. There are other aspects to the scrutiny of China. So I mentioned the trade war, the shifting of supply chains. Obviously, one has to also mention the Belt and Road Initiative and the concerns about debt trap diplomacy, the lack of, equitable sharing of project allocation and this kind of thing. Then in the military domain, the counter coalitions that seek to constrain China's rise, such as the Quad Agreement, obviously go back several years. So a whole host of economic and geopolitical initiatives that were trying to assert multipolar Asia rather than ceding a unipolar Chinese-dominated Asia has been a major theme really in the region for a long time. And this is very important to appreciate, that Asians favor a multipolar future for the region, whereas in Western international relations theory, we just tend to gravitate towards the notion that there must be one dominant hegemon for any given period, and most certainly within a region. But more or less all of Asian history tells you to the contrary, at least for this region of the world. And when we're talking about this region of the world of 4.5 billion people and several major civilizations, I would hazard to claim that understanding Asian history is more important than mapping Westphalian European history onto Asia, which tends to be the mistake that most people make. So the pursuit of a multipolar equilibrium in Asia has been an abiding priority for non-China states in the region, which is obviously many, and one now that Western powers, certainly the United States, are eager to support, and I certainly endorse that. So geopolitical equilibrium, specifically in Eurasia and Asia, as a priority. And again, the push to decentralize or to constrain Chinese power, again, predates the pandemic. Now, in terms of the South Asia-China nexus, that obviously also has a very long history, right? I think most people appreciate that the modern, formations, strategic alignments go back to the 1950s and 1960s in terms of the China-Pakistan sort of axis. So it's no surprise to anyone that the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, is perhaps the most crucial of the Belt and Road arteries. As with all other vectors of the Belt and Road Initiative and its precursors, it has its ups and downs, right, in terms of debt-related issues, financing, project selection, and all of these kinds of things. But of course, the China-Pakistan relationship remains very, very strong. Then on the maritime side, there's the Indo Pacific. Here again, I want to emphasize that I think a lot of people were far too eager to declare that because China has ambitions that are reminiscent of the Ming Dynasty treasure fleets, that therefore one could project a scenario that a viable, even a plausible scenario, where China's naval activities and intrusions and presence in the Indian Ocean, whether it's via Pakistan or through its military relationships with countries in the Horn of Africa, would somehow constitute Indo-Pacific, maritime dominance by China. But again, the countermeasures against that also began quite some time ago. If you think about India's shift in strategic doctrine and its priorities and its defense spending, to emphasize more its naval capacity and development, that goes back 15, 20 years. And we can see the fruits of that now with India's growing naval presence. Australia has a 3-ocean strategy. The United States, of course, remains a powerful naval presence in the Indian Ocean as well. So the notion that the Indian Ocean would not be multipolar, but somehow would come to be dominated by a power such as China, which of course faces the Malacca trap, I think was, obviously geographically ignorant, to say the least. And it's yet another example of how we are, through all of the reactions to China's actions, bringing about, again, a landscape that is going to be much more fluid, much more multipolar than hegemonic. And again, that's a welcome development. So as I said, India is pivotal in that because it has shifted a lot of its focus from the 90s to today, from being a continental power to a maritime power. That said, obviously, as we're seeing every single day, it faces these border disputes in its continental zones with Pakistan in a long-standing way, and with China, of course. Now, I've been of the view, in watching what's unfolding right now, that Asia's frozen conflicts, of which there are many, are never frozen. And I've been saying this for quite a few years, and every time we have an episode such as what we're experiencing right now in the Galwan Valley, it's a reminder that there's no such thing as a frozen conflict. Conflicts are just simmering, festering, deteriorating until they sort of flare up again, and that happens across whether it's India, Pakistan, whether it's North Korea, Taiwan. At the moment, we're seeing obviously all of these situations, more than just simmering at the same time. So we should, those of us who, on the one hand, such as myself, who want to, in a normative way, not just analytically study the Asian system, warts and all, but normatively want to see Asia take on a greater leadership role in the world commensurate with its demographic and economic size. We have to remind ourselves that it's not really plausible for any Asian power to portray itself as a global leader when its own neighborhood is so racked by unsettled conflicts. And so I think that's something for Asian diplomats, Asian strategists to keep in mind right now. Now, just a final couple of points about this. I think we can speak a lot more about what's happening in terms of the India-China standoff at the moment. But I think the broader context of it is that India, and both of them have tried various means of multidimensional engagement over the last several years. Their trade volumes have expanded. Chinese foreign investment into India has been far larger than its investment into Pakistan, obviously in the technology sector and so forth. Now you have the investment restrictions that India has very, clearly, strongly legislated, similar to, in a way, the trend that we've seen with the US and Europe and others. So both sides right now are saying that they, that they don't want this present standoff to impair their economic ties. But the fact is that it's the regulatory dimension of the economic relationship that will ultimately dictate the trade volume more than anything else. So I think that there is one scenario economically where, given the supply chain shifts out of China and India getting its act together, if you will, to craft a strategy to attract as much more, foreign investment as possible, and to be one of these alternative manufacturing centers in the same way that ASEAN is doing, together with India perhaps eventually coming around to joining RCEP, which of course it did not do last year. There's a scenario where India is going to strengthen its economic, hand and role and influence to the east. So the Look East policy, with its strategic and economic components, is a long-term priority for India, and one that I think is going to, pass the test of time, so to speak. So, I think ultimately what we need to be seeking here is not just a lessening of the tensions between powers. I've been working for some time, and perhaps we can come back to this later on a longer essay, which is going to come out in a couple of months, about how the method by which I think some of Asia's major powers need to permanently resolve outstanding disputes. And it has a lot to do with diplomatic mechanisms, with generational change, with the role, obviously, of democratic accountability and so on and so forth. But I genuinely believe that what's, we have the symptoms here, whether it's India, Pakistan, Kashmir, the Galwan issue, and these others, we have the symptoms of a big blind spot, really, in the deferential approach to diplomacy that Asians tend to have, which on the one hand is successful when you want to be making incremental gains, but it leaves these huge blind spots that wind up, obviously rearing their heads as they are right now. So, you know, I'm only at best cautiously optimistic at the moment about Asia's ability to express itself, you know, coherently to the outside world. And I think that a lot of it has to do with these specific issues that are legacy ones, and I want to see the next generation of Asian leaders devote more resources to. So I'll just stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khanna. Sorry, I was muted. So that has given us a lot to think about, incredible insights, and I guess a lot of people are gaining and gathering up for questions. For folks who have risen their hands, I will come to you during the Q&A segment that we have in the last 25 minutes or so, so we can cater to your question and comments at that time, if that's okay. So without further ado again, we're going to move to Dr. Parker. So Dr. Parker, with your background in epidemiology, you've been monitoring the coronavirus situation since day one. And here at EastWest Institute, we have a South Asia program, we have a US-China program. So you've been engaged, invested in these relationships through your work for a while now. So it'll be interesting to hear from you. How are you looking at coronavirus reshaping the world order, global security, and these intra-regional relationships? So over to you, Dr. Parker.
Thank you, Farwa and Dr. Khanna. Absolutely a superb summary there. Because we have over 60 people now on this webinar, I'm going to compress my comments so that we have more time for Q&A, because I think that's the real value of these sessions. That said, you know, John Moreau's founded EastWest Institute about 40 years ago. We focus on conflict prevention. If you go to our website, you will see a daily update that we put together on the coronavirus, and that's at www.eastwest.ngo. So it's eastwest, one word, .ngo, and that really does give you a summary of how we're looking at the coronavirus, what the geopolitical impacts are, what the medical impacts are, how many deaths there are, et cetera. So that's a really good place, a good resource to go look at. That said, let me walk into a couple things with you. One, if you look just numbers-wise, globally today we have 9 million infected, 4.2 million recovered, and 455,000 dead worldwide. If you look at the United States alone, you have 2.9 million infected, 867,000 are recovered, and 123,104 as of 4 minutes ago dead here in the United States right now. I mean, these are very large numbers. And when you look at the fact that New York City, Arizona, Jacksonville, Florida, other places, you're seeing more and more people walking around without masks, and you're starting to see an increase again, and this is summer. I am concerned about what this is going to look like come fall. And so it seems like as we started a transition back to work, not just as a nation, but as a globe, that along with that came a feel that we did not need to continue using the personal protective equipment that we were using before. So for the 60 of us or so online here, I will tell you that if you're not using your PPE, I think you're making a mistake. This is a respiratory disease that spreads by droplets, and those masks really will make a huge difference in your safety. This is a virus, and as a virus, it's basically pieces of genetic material, that's RNA and DNA, that's wrapped up in protein, and it makes more copies of themselves in and around our body. It needs a living host to survive, unlike a bacteria, which does not. And as I said, it is respiratory and it's spread by droplets. The ability to spread is important. You may start hearing, or you may have heard the term R0 a lot. It's a R sub 0, if you will, but it's called R0 in the epidemiology world. And basically what this is saying is that how much does one person transmit to other human beings? So in other words, if we have an R0 of 1, then that means that I would only infect one other person. If that R0 gets down below 1, then basically the disease will die. And this is a big discussion right now amongst epidemiologists, and I'm on every week with some of the most senior epidemiologists around the world. And the real question for us is, well, one, of course, the cure, and we can talk about that a little bit. But then the second one is, what is R naught? And you're getting numbers between 4 and 6 right now, which are just huge numbers, and as low as 1 to 3. And it really depends on the environment in that part of the globe, whether or not it's hotter or warmer, whether or not people are using masks or not. But the R naught right now seems to be somewhere between 1 and 3 or 4 and 6, depending on what part of the globe. That's a huge point here. Additionally, I think we need to talk about, there's really 3 ways for this to end. Number one is we find a vaccine. That would be great. If we find a vaccine soon, and again, if you go on our website and look, you will see what the most current up-to-date vaccines that are being tested, and the ones that not only the United States, but the United Kingdom, Pakistan, China, Russia, around the globe, what are those that are most likely to succeed? And we put that on our updates every day. So that's number one. Number two is herd immunity. And what herd immunity is when you get 70 to 90% of the population is infected, then basically the virus gives up and it says, okay, I've infected everybody I can, and the virus shuts itself down. And then third is that you have 12 to 18 months of containment and prophylactic practices, and that curve will flatten, and eventually it will begin to decline. So the reality is, if you get a good vaccine, one that works, and we can vaccinate the majority of the population, then herd immunity will take effect much faster, because those people will no longer be infected. So I think I'll stop there, but can certainly try to answer any of your questions. Again, my background's in epidemiology. It is not as an MD. So if you have specific questions on shots, or you have a sore knee, I probably can't help you with that. So I'll stop there. And Farwa, thank you for including me today. Again, Dr. Khanna, I thought it was just an absolute great summary of what's going on around the globe. So I won't repeat your great points.
So amazing insights shared by our 2 speakers. And now we have quite a few interests in the questions and some more time allocated. So I am going to move towards those folks who have raised their hands, and I'm going to unmute you so you may ask your questions live. All right, here we go. This is Ms. Lata Reddy.
Hello, Lata Reddy here. Can you?
We lost you, Ms. Reddy. Are you with us again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, okay, I can.
Great.
Yes, we can.
No, I was just interested in asking both the participants, what do they make of the current standoff in the Galwan Valley between India and China? Because I think it's very much on everyone's mind. Could I have their take on how it's being seen, let's say in the US and in other centers in the international media? I know how it's being seen in India as a provocation of India, and there's much talk going on about how India should retaliate, but I'd be interested in hearing the international point of view on this. That's my question.
Dr. Khanna, I'll start with you, since you're closer over there, and then I'll step in after, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, there's obviously a mood right now internationally to want to impute to China, these kinds of nefarious intentions when it comes to territorial incursions. We had the Doklam Plateau standoff, for example, a couple of years ago. The ongoing, the military aircraft that are performing certain menacing maneuvers around Taiwan right now, obviously the island building activity in South China Sea, and the list, actually goes on in different, micro contexts, but it is all part of a broader, Chinese strategy that relates to infrastructure as a tool, in a way, of asserting certain geopolitical advantage. And in this case, of course, some would say, on the other hand, that is India's road development in these northern areas that was a provocation. Again, I've been to Aksai Chin on the Chinese side actually, and driven through there about 10 years ago, and of course, one could go back, play the tape, go back in time and see the extent to which Chinese infrastructure development has, clearly pushed across certain boundary lines, and these tactics in a way are meant to test the adversary. So, of course, I think it matters less how international powers perceive it as what show of strength is sort of put forward. Now, the United States, irrespective of what is publicly said, is obviously been selling very advanced weaponry to India. In the last 10 years, India has been one of the largest acquirers of advanced, American military technology. So it's also been, emphasizing obviously its ability, especially since Doklam, to handle these kinds of high altitude and somewhat unexpected kinds of encounters. So there shouldn't really be any doubt, probably on the Chinese side, that India is going to hold its line there. There's no question that it will. And again, more broadly, the lesson here is that when powers do stand up to China with, in a very, very substantial way, making clear what their lines are, it has actually been China that backs down. And that was the lesson, as ambiguous as the Doklam, standoff was a couple of years ago. It's certainly the lesson that India took away, is that it needs to, draw those lines very clearly. And that's the lesson that others will as well. So, at the moment, this appears much, to a higher degree of escalation. But the path that it could take is perhaps reminiscent of what happened in Doklam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Reddy, I'll add to that if I could, and I agree with the comments that the doctor just made. I will tell you that I think there's an expected progression that we've been watching for quite a while with the Chinese, and I think it starts with economic expansion and strengthening. It then goes to the use of soft power, and then from there, it was a expectation that sooner or later you would see more and more use of the military. And this is one of those examples. I agree with the point that it does appear that when pushed back upon for certain incursions, that you will see a response by the Chinese in general of, okay, this is more than we wanted to deal with. I will say that I think it was a surprise to many of how many fatalities you're talking about in this case, and the extended use of the military beyond what we've seen in the past. So this could be a new level. I also think it's interesting that when we talk about a post-coronavirus world, it's now time to talk about a coronavirus world, because the world is continuing to spin and people are continuing to act in the way that they're going to act, and some are going to take advantage of that. This is why here at EastWest, we continue to do conflict prevention to the nth degree throughout this pandemic. And I do think this pandemic will spike at least one more time. And during this, how do you continue to operate? And part of that is these types of webinars, to have these discussions with very smart people like you. So again, what I think you're going to see is a continued expansion from economic to soft power, and then to military use, as China will probably continue to feel emboldened over the next few years.
Thank you so much. I just want to add one thing, that I think one thing that's created a very strong reaction in India is the fact that, this was really hand-to-hand combat. And the question is, in today's world, it's rare to hear of hand-to-hand combat. You hear of fatalities because of bombs or explosions, and definitely by shooting. But hand-to-hand combat and actually clobbering people and throwing them into icy rivers is somehow, the savagery of it has really sunk very deep into the Indian reaction, the psyche of the Indians. So I think, it would be very difficult not to have some repercussions from this. The second thing is China is being very silent about fatalities on their side. But I recently read that the US estimate is 35 casualties on the Chinese side as well. So I don't know whether the fact that, it just was a local scrap that escalated out of control, or whether this is a very carefully controlled strategic move by China with a reaction from India. The interesting thing is that the Galwan Valley itself has not been an area of dispute in the past. There have been other areas on the LAC, since China doesn't recognize the LAC, which was always established internationally as the confirmed LAC, and we've been talking for a long time. But as you know, there have been no shots fired since 1975 on the border. But I think the sort of physical violence that was used is a very, very strange new phenomenon. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Reddy. I will now move on to our next participant in line who's raised his hand. So Mr. Ikram Saigal, I'm going to unmute you. So please do ask your question.
Thank you, Farwa. Can you hear me? Farwa, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. First of all, a very good suppositions and rendering of the facts. Fortunately, I'm perhaps the only person among the whole group, I don't know if anybody else, that 50 years ago actually have been in that area. I was attached to the People's Liberation Army as a helicopter pilot on the army side when they're making the Karakoram Highway. And therefore, this entire area, right up to Siachen, Kargil, etc., right up to Gujarat Pass, etc., I have actually personally flown over, and the terrain is not very hospitable. Now, as far as the latest thing is concerned, it is most unfortunate because it's a simmering thing which is coming from 1962. And if you look at 1962, it actually occurred because of India's forward policy, in which they decided in 1961 to establish 43 posts. And now whether it's Galwan Valley, whether it's Nathula Pass, the fact of the matter remains the situation escalated after August 5th, 2019, when India unilaterally revoked Article 370 and absorbed Ladakh within the Indian state, this thing. Now, when that happened, China said, this is disputed territory. Ladakh is disputed territory. Like we in Pakistan said, Kashmir is disputed territory, and you cannot do this. Now there is, because of that, I think things escalated. Historically, Ladakh is Chinese. It used to be part of Tibet. It was only after the Maharaja of Kashmir with British Suzerainty signed an agreement with Tibet, which China does not recognize, because China does not recognize anything to do with Tibet. So I think it is restraint from both sides is called for. The Corps commanders met and they decided not to use live rounds, and that is why you probably came to this brutal action where people have been killed on both sides. But I think, one has to be very careful here, because the access to all the areas that are disputed, whether it's along the McMahon line, whether it's Bomdila, whether it's Nathula Pass, whether it's Galwan Valley, whether it's Siachen, the access is easier from the Chinese side rather from the Indian side. So therefore, it is, if you look at it from a physical, from the military point of view, it is easier accessible from the Chinese side. Now, as far as Parag Khanna's think about maritime power is concerned, let me tell you, China thought this out very correctly when they decided about the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative. They knew that in about another 20, 30 years, they cannot compete with the United States or other maritime powers, either in the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. Therefore, they set about setting this Belt Road Initiative, which gives them road access and rail access to Europe. It takes 45 days now via sea to get to Europe. It takes only 15 to 16 days from Shanghai to Paris. So I think, and if you look at it, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, whether it's the road which go through, through Central Asia, etc. But the fact of the matter remains that road communication has actually replaced maritime powers. The maritime powers really, except maybe the aircraft carriers can interdict by their air power, they really cannot interdict the trade routes which now China is forming up. So I think we have to be realistic about this. We have to be realistic about the new dynamics that is containing. India has, India has a big power. It's a big economic power. It is in the interest of India that the entire region stays friends with its own borders. Unfortunately, it's got a problem with Pakistan, long-standing. It's now got a problem with Nepal. It has somewhat of a problem with Sri Lanka, right? It is developing a problem with Bangladesh because when you declare 1.8 million former Bangladeshis, as you call them, as aliens, then you're going to have a problem. So I think, except for, if you look at it today, except for maybe the Maldives and Bhutan, really India is not, does not have a good relationship with its neighbors. On the other hand, let me tell you one thing, as far as investment is concerned, yes, there's a huge amount of trade between China and India. And I think that is one of the bargaining tools that India has, because a lot of Chinese goods come into India. And in this pandemic world, I think China would be loath to lose its markets. And that is probably one of the great, I would say, assets India has in dealing with any Chinese thing. But let me tell you one thing very clearly, that, we have this thing, etc. All the advanced weaponry that Parag Khanna you've been talking about is not directed towards China. 4/5 of the Indian armed forces are camped on our borders, on our eastern borders, 4/5. And if you look at it, whether it's Air Force, whether it's armed force, whether it's army, etc., in even the naval forces that arrayed against us is against Pakistan. So basically you may have the mountain divisions and you may have whatever, and very well trained mountain division and well activized, but I don't think that the positioning of those forces is in a way that can counter anything if it goes from blows and fisticuffs to actual war that really India can counter. Now, the problem with India is very clear. The problem with India is the Indian public and Indian media built up a hype about their armed forces. It is a great hype, that they can do anything. And that now the Chinese has this thing, like you heard Ms. Reddy is talking about repercussions and retaliations. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Because if that happens, India is going to find itself, they should go and read a Henderson Brooks report, which was given after 1962, and find out that there are still a lot of gaps in that issue where I think have to be covered. So I think things need to be calmed down. We don't need to talk about retaliation or repercussion, etc. And we need to calm down the Indian media and Indian public and say fine, because China is keeping pretty tight-lipped about it. And unfortunately, one thing more I must say to Parag Khanna, the Doklam Plateau, the Chinese did not back down. They only told India at that time that the dispute is between us and Bhutan. And you have come in 50 kilometers, you've sent your forces 50 kilometers into dispute territory. So tomorrow, if there is a dispute between Pakistan in dispute territory with Kashmir, then we have the same analogy and we can go into Kashmir also. At that point of time, I think better sense prevailed and things calmed down. So I think to expect that, just by, saber rattling and by jingoistic statements, China is going to back down is incorrect. China, we'll have to deal with China in a rational, composed, calm manner and convince them that it's in the interest of the entire region, which is it, not to engage into conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Sehgal. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Dr. Parag Khanna, would you like to comment on what Mr. Sehgal just shared?
These are all very, very interesting. I think, one of the most important things we need to remember is that a lot of these conflict theaters, these specific episodes, are linked, not necessarily just because they're linked to China as a common actor, but increasingly what happens as relations become more intense or there's more friction, you find that you will have simultaneously have activity on the Kashmir side or in the Galwan. You'll have the northeastern sectors active, you'll have the Indian Ocean maneuvering going on, South China Sea, and it's perhaps not a surprise at some level because there is a multi-directional calculus going on. So in a way, I think it is important that we appreciate the linkages across these. Now, the onus ultimately, though, in some ways, or the most difficult challenge diplomatically in terms of the number of balls in the air to juggle at the same time, of course, does rest with China. China has 14 neighbors, so it simultaneously faces a bit of pushback on all of these different fronts. And some of those fronts involve the US and the support that the US is lending to allies and partners, and others don't involve the US. But there become, the more variables you introduce, the more difficult it is for China to manage it, to juggle it all, and to be able to predict what several steps, several moves in advance, what the reactions are going to be to its actions. And I think that as much as I've been, studying Belt and Road for a long time, I've written a lot about it, traveled, all of these corridors. I think that China has, grossly underestimated the willingness of its neighbors, regional powers, the United States and others, to define, to create, to support and empower these coalitions that are going to take not just military, because ultimately that's only one dimension to look at, but also the economic, diplomatic, and other steps to counter Chinese measures. So it is going to be a very long game. Ikram is absolutely correct about that. But I think that China does actually, more than people realize, overestimate itself.
Thank you, Dr. Khanna. Anything to add, Dr. Parker?
I think it's interesting when you start talking about Belt and Road Initiative and you start looking at the fact that ports actually play a huge part in BRI. Here at EastWest, we spent about 14 months studying Belt and Road, did a pretty major study on this. And what the applications would be to conflict prevention around the globe. And when you look at that and you look at where those ports are located now, and the fact that there are some countries that are now pushing back on those original ports that were placed in their country, it is interesting. The points that Ikram Sehgal made, I think, are key. When you look at that Shanghai to Paris transition, 45 days by sea and 15 days by land now. That not only has serious implications to moving commerce, goods, and services back and forth, but it also has an impact on moving military forces back and forth. And I think that's something that everybody is taking when I say everybody, the globe is taking a good hard look at of where and how fast troops could be moved in some of these efforts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. We are now going to, there's a lot of interest in questions. So I'm going to take a question that was sent to us by Dr. Walter Ladwig for Dr. Khanna. Dr. Ladwig asks, you discussed the fact that some countries are experiencing more interest in diversifying their supply chains to reduce exposure to China, most notably Japan. In the wake of the COVID pandemic, how much can government policies shape the decisions of thousands of individual firms, and how much scope is there for firms to find alternative production sites in other parts of Asia? So over to you, Dr. Khanna from Dr. Ladwig.
It's a great question. So, we have very different regulatory systems in Asia, different degrees of state support or subsidies. or other means of public-private cooperation, the role of export promotion agencies, and so on and so forth. And different industry supply chains have built up. But let's remember that countries like Japan and South Korea in particular have always emphasized their own vertically integrated supply chains. It's really been a matter of A, cost calculus in terms of offshoring to China, B, of course, getting an edge on exports to China. But the more that China has risen up the value chain and sought to displace its own largest foreign investors, such as Japan, Korea, the United States, and others, the less incentive those firms have to be all in with China. So what you've seen is that even Toyota, which for some time has been the largest automaker in the world, has started shifting a lot of its automobile production to Thailand and other countries. Samsung, if I'm not mistaken, is not making mobile handsets in China anymore, or it's only making the mobile handsets in China that it sells in China, but it's making far more in Vietnam now, and it's automating, obviously through robotics, a lot of that production in South Korea as well. So it's, quite frankly, even though China is a huge market, and a company like Apple and many of the chip manufacturers will say that that cluster, that ecosystem of production at high level of efficiency at cost and scale that China offers is not replicable in Vietnam today. That is absolutely true. On the other hand, given labor costs and given the fungibility of investment of technology, countries and their companies are not at all averse to making the effort to try to recreate as best possible those ecosystems across one country or several, also because those markets are also fast growing. And for any number of categories of goods, China is quite saturated. Again, even if you have either deceleration of consumption, or again, you have national champions dominating the market. So I think there is an alignment of lower cost in other regions, the incentive to want to sell in those markets, and of course now the strategic imperative, given the competition and the regulatory tensions and other factors playing a role in this. So you will inevitably have this broadening, dissipation, diversification of supply chains. I don't believe you'll have full decoupling. It's almost meaningless to talk that way. The more you understand about supply chains, the more you understand that they are everywhere, and the supply chain has a supply chain, as I like to say, that's often a hidden layer or layers that people have not taken into account. So I think that China is going to continue to be central in many, many ways, but the notion that it's the only place where you can do something was much more a statement of convenience and reflecting the fixed investments that companies had made, rather than the reality that many things can be made in many places today.
So thank you so much, Dr. Khanna. I will now move to another participant who would want to ask a question. So Dr. Merowitz, are you with us?
I am, thank you very much. It's an excellent presentation, excellent program. Now the point Dr. Khanna made about regionalism and the regional powers getting together to counter China, I would just take the case study of the South China Sea to question how that would work, because first of all, a number of the states in the South China Sea actually have conflicting claims against each other, not just with respect to China. And furthermore, Chinese militarization of the islands, they're really ratcheting up their pressure in terms of expanding their influence and claims on the South China Sea. It turns out that a state like Vietnam, which the United States fought a brutal war with, now really is looking to the United States for help in countering China. So you talk about regionalism, isn't US leadership indispensable to work with these states to allow them to take a position that can actually challenge China's expansion of influence? The regional powers alone, I would question, don't have that power and influence. And I further reiterate the fact that they have claims against each other. For Dr. Parker, my question is, how do we plan and prepare for the next pandemic? It's going to be inevitable. What should we be doing or thinking about hopefully when we finish with COVID-19, about thinking about what steps we need to take to be ready if unfortunately another pandemic occurs. Thank you very much again for the great program.
Thank you, Dr. Merowitz. Over to the speakers, Dr. Khanna and Dr. Parker.
It's an excellent question. And again, I am a strong supporter of the U.S. maritime presence in the Pacific area at the very least, and its role in supporting through the Quad Agreement and other formations to strengthen the capacity of littoral powers such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Now, of course, bilaterally, China has still found ways to usurp or to undermine in some ways those countries' willingness, their own individual willingness to stand up for their own claims, such as the Philippines, given the economic relationship, how intense that is, the incentives that China is able to provide. So what I would say is that, even though the US presence is absolutely indispensable in the Quad formation, again, let's not discount the importance of the Japanese Navy as well, providing assistance and hardware to Indonesia and Vietnam, as it's also doing. But even that, to actually take your point, but still flip the result on its head, is that I see very little appetite to actually undo, or capacity, or again, willingness to undo what China has already done. So my goal, quite frankly, for the South China Sea would not be something unrealistic, like China giving up claims on islands that it has actually just 3 weeks ago formally granted a proper administrative status to. So it has now really formalized its sovereign control, not just its de facto physical assets on these territories, on these islands. So I do, quite frankly, believe that they are, and I think any sane observer would say that these are irreversible, because simply there is no willingness to attempt to overturn them by force. So what really is going on is more A, freedom of navigation operations led most certainly by the United States, and B, efforts to at least designate those islands in the Spratly Paracel clusters and elsewhere that Vietnam does control, that the Philippines does control, and again to draw a line and to say that these will not be given up, and that therefore the exclusive economic zones apply, and that freedom of navigation must prevail. And these remain very worthy objectives, even absent any ability to win back some of the specific island territories that China has claimed thus far.
Thank you, Dr. Khanna. Dr. Parker, how do we plan for the next pandemic?
Yes, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Merowitz. Great question. I will start by saying that there's a Ready or Not report that comes out every year in the United States, and it basically says whether or not we are ready for a biological event in particular. It talks about other viruses, bacteria, et cetera, but it's really a biological event. Well, if it's an attack in particular. That said, as the United States and as a globe, I think we are getting better at it, but we have a long ways to go, as we've proven here by this pandemic. Self-sufficiency is an important part of this, and it's a global self-sufficiency, a national, a hospital, and then an individual self-sufficiency. And that doesn't mean that you should have a large backpack of stuff, your go bag, if you will, to respond quickly. But where do you get this stuff, and how quickly can we begin producing masks, vaccines, et cetera? That said, testing is important, and we're showing this right now. But probably the most important thing, and the item that we still aren't good enough at as a globe, is detection and reporting. And so I believe that had we detected earlier, and had we reported immediately, whether that was in China or anywhere else, doesn't matter where this started, that detection and reporting needs to happen. If we find out down the road that detection and reporting are spread widely, in other words, a country or individuals knew about the coronavirus, COVID-19 in particular, and yet they didn't report it to others for a very long period of time, they need to be held accountable in the most brutal economic ways possible, because we not only lost a lot of lives, but the impact on the global economy is significant. So I think that needs to be probably the largest lesson learned here, is that we are going to hold people accountable if they keep this to themselves and do not report to the rest of the globe.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. We have about 5 minutes now, so we'll try to accommodate a question or two, but we'll have to wrap up. We have a question from Mr. Nisar Maiman for both the speakers. The question is, what is the impact of COVID-19 in the area, which is Kashmir on LOC, and what is the medical support being provided to Kashmiris there, since in Pakistan, Kashmir site status is regularly released and posted? Any comments from our speakers on that?
Maybe Dr. Parker wants to take that.
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and take that. Let me say on a specific term of how many PPEs, how many ventilators, et cetera, provided in Kashmir. I don't know, but that's a great question, and we'll look into that. And Farwa, if you can get the name and contact information, let me see if we can do some research on that, because we owe an answer on that. We will also post an answer to that on our website for you. It's a general question. You really have to look at, from an epidemiological standpoint, what the spread is going to be and what the expectation is of how many beds you need, how many ventilators you need, how many vaccines you need, et cetera. There's another impact here, though, which is we're seeing around the globe that people are less likely to show up at the hospital now to get routine tests done and to get routine work done. And I think you will see down the road, and this is becoming a concern of the MDs around the globe right now, that you will see down the road that you will have more long-term health issues that are impacted because people didn't get these regular tests, whether they're whether they're tests for cancer or your normal blood tests, et cetera. So I think that will have an impact too. But again, to answer your specific question about what is being provided in Kashmir, I'm sure there's a lot of anecdotal information back there, but let us get beyond the anecdotal and actually get you some facts. We'll answer your question, and then we'll also put it out on our website. And I believe Dr. Ladwig is online, who is truly an expert in this region from the EastWest Institute. Maybe we could just turn it over to him really quickly if you have any other inputs. So Dr. Ladwig, anything to add?
Dr. Ladwig, if you could raise your hand, I will be able to unmute you. We have him here. Dr. Ladwig? Can you hear us?
Okay, maybe we proceed on.
All right. In that case, we can move forward with another question, the last one, if possible, because we are really close to time. So this is a question from Mr. Jahangir Khattak for Dr. Khanna. What options India has in the current standoff with China? Also, why India has these issues with neighbors, but mounting tensions with almost all of India's neighbors are fairly new. Dr. Khanna, would you like to comment on that?
I think, each of these particular standoffs has its own long history. Earlier was some of the colonial agreements were cited, for example, those that either China recognizes or does not recognize anything that predates its modern founding and so forth. And one of the things that I've often argued is that the reason why international law is so difficult to apply to some of these outstanding Asian conflicts is because many of them are in a way pre-legal, because they predate the founding of the United Nations and the various treaties and ratifications at that time. They're basically legacies of colonization, which of course predates 1945. So I think that each of these has their own unique history in a way, and they've been frozen. Again, I don't like that word, but they have been static or ignored because this was a period of time, the last 70 years, where the post-colonial world was largely focused on domestic nation building, right? Particularly during the Cold War, and even recently, given the extensive, the enormous pace of modernization and economic development over the last couple of decades. So it's now that you have each of the powers in the region being sufficiently stable, confident, wealthy, having invested in their militaries, building this infrastructure across border and so forth, that you might even say inevitably have these frictions. So, you know, it takes two to tango, right? Or two hands rubbing together. And that's basically what is going on now. And again, as I said at the beginning, it really comes down to whether Asians can go back to the patterns of intercivilizational encounters in which space is overlapped, rather than adopting or mimicking in a way the inheritance of sovereign Westphalian borders and legacies. That's going to be the only way forward, I think.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khanna. With that, we have just hit the time, so we'll have to wrap it up. So I'm going to wrap up today's wonderful discussion by thanking everyone. Thank you to our experts, Dr. Khanna, Dr. Parker, for joining us, for making this conversation so insightful and knowledgeable for our audience. And of course, very grateful to all our attendees and participants for their input and making this discussion all the more engaging. Thank you, and we will keep you posted on all our future endeavors at the EastWest Institute. Thank you again, Dr. Khanna and Dr. Parker, and have a great day. And I must say, please stay safe, everyone.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Great job, Farwa.
Thank you.